is, well, you get put on a mail out list, but also I've got a few wee things I can send around to you, so that if you find this evening useful, then you can use them as and when you need. My contact details are on the end slide as well, so that you can get in touch and share with me what you're doing and ask for support or whatever. Most of you know me, and first of all, I suppose I want to say thank you very much for coming. But for those of you who maybe don't know me, my name is Nathan Erskine. I'm a lecturer in working with children, families and youth and community work right here at the University of Cumbria. This evening obviously is about peace education, and particularly looking at what is called the Peace Education Competence Framework. Anybody who has come here thinking that they're going to get an expert talk about that framework needs to leave now, because I'm not an expert. I am at the start of, close to the start of my journey with this. I've been exploring it. I first got introduced to it about 18 months ago, maybe a little bit longer than that. And I've been exploring how I could use it with young people. Unfortunately, over the past few weeks, I've been able to create an opportunity where I can actually use it with young people myself. But that's yet to kind of be implemented in the development stage of that. And also developing a bit of an understanding of how it can be used here at the university as well, on some of the modules that I teach on or going to teach on a newly validated programme. So that's a little bit about where I'm at. So I'm not an expert, okay, but hopefully I've developed enough of an understanding to give you guys some interesting tools that you perhaps could find use this in your own workplace. I'm really, really confident that this is something that can be applied no matter what your professional setting is. I am absolutely convinced that the work I'm going to be doing one day a week, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a secondary school with a pastoral team, this can be applied to that just as much as it can be here with adult learners in the university, and everywhere in between that. I'm positive of it. It's just about some of it might require a little bit of thinking outside the box, but I'm hoping what I've developed for you this evening will let you do that. Before we go any further, appreciate that people probably don't know each other, so could we just maybe do a really, really quick, awkward, I know, round robin, and some people are like, oh, don't say that, I know I saw you, but just a quick round robin, your name and the organisation you've come from.
Yeah, I'm Eileen, and I elected my PGC here about 25 years ago. I was planning teaching around Lancashire ethnic minority GCSE on the travel service, and have done some studying there. I'm not sure I've got the right, I'm sure this will be interesting to me, but when I studied peace education, I did peace studies at Bradford as well, and I just wondered if it was...
Brilliant, and if this isn't useful, I actually have something that you might already be aware of that's sitting on my desk that might be useful for you, so catch me at the end, especially if this is useless. I'll have something that saves it. Thanks.
I'm Amy Roberts. I work at West Haven High School.
I've been talking about
yeah.
it.
And then, what else?
Your name, where you're from, that'll do.
Catherine, and I work at West Haven as a teacher.
I'm Sam, and I'm a level 5 student here, studying music and media.
I'm Joyce Carl, I'm teaching youth and community work team.
I'm Sarah, and I'm a final year student in the youth and community.
I'm Owen. I'm Oliver, currently a student at college, and I'm hoping to come here in September for youth and community work.
I'm Beth Smith. I came here and did work with children and families, and now I'm a residential support worker in children's. I'm Jenny. I'm a third year student here working with children and families.
I'm Donna. I'm a third year student also working with children and families.
I'm Kelly. I'm also a
Representing the third year. Thank you very much, guys. Checks in the post. Thank you very much for that. So we're going to, hopefully everybody can see the screen above me or around me. I'm going to look at a few kind of key concepts today. look at what conflict and violence means. And the reason why I'm going to go through that, albeit quite briefly, is that we have quite prejudicial views about what those terms mean, and actually people assume we talk about physical violence and physical conflict, and actually if you try and apply that to this competency framework, then it doesn't really work. And actually there's much more to conflict and violence than just physicality. We'll look at what peace means in the peace education, some examples, some challenges, and a little bit of a framework. Kind of introduction to like a core part of the framework. It's far too big to go into in any great detail. Again, look at some of the examples and challenges associated with peace education, and then looking at how we could maybe plan and apply this to your practice. Now, that's not specifically the order that we're going to go through. We're going to do a little bit of the plan and apply throughout, so that gives your ears a bit of a rest from my voice, hopefully, and an opportunity to kind of develop some of the discussions that will be hopefully just as helpful as what I've got planned. So, conflict and violence then. This is perhaps the reason why we look at conflict and violence a little bit differently than what people would assume. That there's different sources to conflict and different types of violence. So yeah, at the top of the triangle, you'll see physical violence, that kind of common awareness that we have of that type. But violence can also come in the form of attitudes, and also it very much depends on the context as well. It could be that actually what we view as violent in our society, in our community, other communities and other societies don't necessarily see as violence. And really, whilst that's quite useful, the education framework, I'll just move that kind of thing out of the way so that we can see them all. The framework gives us quite a nice balance of a bit of a spectrum of what stages of conflict and what conflict looks like. So stages are things like having difference, contradiction between different peoples and different values, polarization, violence, right up to war. Perhaps our most commonly assumed type of violence that everybody's aware of. Out and out war. Bombs, bullets, the lot. Beyond that, you might have, when you're coming away from violence or coming away from war, you have things like a ceasefire, an agreement, normalization, and then finally reconciliation. This is where I think the vast majority of the people in this room will do their work when it comes to peace education or dealing with any types of conflict. I don't know about you, but I'm probably not going to be very good in a war situation. And it's not something I hope I ever get the opportunity, unless I volunteer to do it, I get the opportunity to have to do, to be honest with you. But when I think about things like difference and contradiction, and especially where I come from in Northern Ireland, the ideas of normalisation and reconciliation, those are massively important parts of work. Can anybody think of some examples that might fit into some of those? We could maybe do a bit of a cheat first.
Maybe on the difference is when you've got people from different cultural backgrounds and they're not really understanding each other's cultures.
Yeah. So what type of work might you already be aware of, or you may already be doing, that would deal with that sort of?
So the thing to move that in, it's about that equality and diversity. So discussing and talking around the differences in culture and why they're there and where they actually come from, where they from their families, from their culture back home, where they originate from. So all that sort of looking at all those things.
So where difference comes from, and it might be taking the education of peace education quite literally, and actually educating people about difference and what difference looks like, and actually how sometimes while we might have a different way of doing things, it's actually similar to what we already have. For example, religion. Most of us pray to the same God, but in actual fact, we do it in a different way. And that's often, it's that crux of difference that people don't necessarily understand. So it's a really good example. Some of the examples that are provided in the framework could be things like looking at multiple identity training, problem solving, looking at developing a culture of peace in a particular community. So trying to remove, not necessarily remove difference, but celebrating difference and showing that that isn't necessarily something to be scared of. Civil society development, training on human rights and governance. So looking at what policies are out there, maybe what policies need development, and actually the reason why this sits in this kind of under peace education is that, as a number of us will know, hopefully, that participation of civil society is important, especially when we're working with young children and young people. But in actual fact, this affects everybody. So all stakeholders, all people in society should have the opportunity to feed into that. Some of the more extreme stages of conflict obviously require more extreme interventions. So peacekeeping, negotiation, that'll be with elites, politicians potentially, crisis management, or just trying to keep the peace when there is a war going on, perhaps even creating safe havens. Preventative peacekeeping, confidence building and disarmament, power sharing at a political level, and then kind of getting back into where we can potentially have a role in collective security, cooperation agreements between different communities and different peoples, and then back into that peace education level of cultural exchanges, problem solving, peace and conflict awareness. So again, coming back to that, acknowledging difference, and I think celebrating diversity is a core part of this document, and making sure that actually, regardless of who you're working with, whether it's children, young people, families, vulnerable adults, whoever, community members as a whole, actually understand that the difference that they have doesn't necessarily have to be a negative thing. You can see the final point I would make, and again, just to kind of remind ourselves of maybe those stages that we work at, is that that spectrum goes from difference, relatively peaceful place in a community and a society, through to violence. So anything before that, you're talking about preventative measures. After that, you're reacting, you're trying to recover from violence, and that's significantly more difficult than preventative work.
Can I just go on and move? Like, we have to deal with violence when kids fight. So is that, obviously, you're saying the main form, but we deal with violence when kids have a fight in school.
So physical violence is like, how you deal with that is dependent on where that comes from. So you might have someone fighting, but it might be because of racial issues, it might be because of bullying, and actually trying to prevent that is just as important as breaking the fight up. So you could make this a micro example and say, well, a fight is akin to a war, so peace enforcement is breaking up and making sure kids that are fighting together don't share classes, for example. Does that sound like something that you might do or have done in the past?
Yeah.
So that's like a micro example of peace enforcement.
Just jumping.
So what I'd like you to do, and I've got a bit of a worksheet for you, and this is, like I said, to give you a bit of a rest from my voice, is we've got a worksheet with different tasks. And task 1 is the violence and conflict in my professional setting. Sorry. So you're welcome to put your name and your role and your professional setting on it. If you wish, you don't have to. The reason why I've put that on is maybe just to remind yourself, has everybody got a pen? Oh, sorry. Is to remind yourselves that actually you're not here just to try and make me feel good or just learn something new generally, that actually the ideas you're putting down can be applied to your work. So the first thing I'm asking you to have a bit of a look at is this top set of boxes. Think about the 3 different types of violence we looked at in that first triangle. Physical violence, cultural violence, structural violence. Now, what I've put in italics is just an example to maybe help you out. But have a think now about what those types of violence might look like in the places that you work in. Notice how the example I've used is fights, but there's more to it. I haven't just used the general label fights. I've explained of who's involved more often than not. Just my example. Not making. It was just an example. Not making any assumptions.
Oh, well, there you go. No, she's in that.
What cultural violence can you be when a member of the gang?
Potentially. If it develops, if attitudes and feelings are causing that violence, if those come from those gangs, then yeah.
So it's a case of that comes into to fit because the family structure is maybe unstable, so that wants them to fit and find that family.
Yeah. You
sort of feeling.
Fighting for your family, maybe?
Join again, and they then become your family. So.
Yeah, I think that's a really good example.
Yeah, and that one, domestic violence. That would be cultural, but not specific families. It's within their culture, within the family, without names.
Potentially, yeah, we know that that's the case in some examples.
So that would come under drugging and alcohol misuse by parents who live within that family setting.
Again, another example. It could be because those who are acting out the domestic violence in this example have experienced it perhaps as a child, or it could be because of drug abuse, alcohol abuse. It could be a combination of both.
Girls fight for the boys, let's be honest. That's what, well, boys and drugs is what it sounds to me. Or male teachers that you fancy them. Locality.
Yeah, locality, community.
What would poverty come under?
That's a question.
It depends on the source of it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So poverty within. community. So,
Scouts don't
just
attack.
look now,
We've got compared to a school,
So,
you've got all these
there's a culture of violence associated with that area.
Yeah,
Yeah,
So
Yes.
what would that be?
I think it's
Structural.
yeah.
that would be cultural, but
But it's also structural because it's about government policies going into that area.
I know that when
exactly. So if there was a lack of intervention or lack of help because of those cultural reasons, then the structural violence is actually that lack of intervention on behalf of government and local agencies. Love it. This is really good. I'm excited. Is that a wee bit giggly?
I've got room now. The poverty with the culture is lack of opportunities, isn't it?
What this is encouraging you to do, and what I think everybody's doing a really good job of, is actually trying to get the grips and understand where violence happens and where it comes from. So,
So would like to know the isolation groups in schools, the isolation units and people with family units. Are they a form of violence? It's disengagement of people, marginalising from formal curriculum that they're supposed to be engaged in.
potentially. The example I used there was that if you just keep giving detentions out without just purely punitive, without any learning of why the behaviour is wrong, then is the behaviour really going to change?
But I mean, I think that to take that a step further, you've got the isolation ones that if they don't turn up for detention, such like they end up in the isolation blocks, and that can then lead to disengaging from education, which can then lead to learning groups, and it's that sort of roller coaster.
Yeah,
So which is being completely disengaged from the education system, which ultimately leads to convenience.
And then if you don't get rid of that one person, that's affecting 31 others. So I expect to just get rid of that one.
and
But should you be getting rid of them, should you not have access to education?
But they do help them that far until they're that far gone that there's absolutely nothing else in mainstream school can do. And you can't be able to mainstream
I'm
school.
sorry, I don't want to get into this because this is my dissertation.
well, actually, there's obviously, as much as I've said today, like this is going to apply to everybody's work. We're going to have different ways of applying it, and actually, you know, of course, as you and I every evening when we go home experience with very, very different views as youth worker and as a teacher. So it's okay to have diverging views. What one person describes as structural violence would perhaps another person would say, well, actually, we're doing the structure that in that case is doing all it can. You know, my argument would be that where a pupil, I absolutely agree, where a pupil's being disruptive in a classroom, they shouldn't disrupt the learning of potentially 30 other students or more.
I agree with that, but then to put them in an isolation or to exclude them to the IU, which is a less quality of education for them, for me, is doing a massive disservice. I think there should be I mean, I don't know, when I went to school, they had the different banners, and these troublesome young people were in the special classes, as we call them, I don't like that term, but they will work with on a more one-to-one basis.
We haven't got the teachers and stuff to
And
do
they
that
say,
anymore.
And that very example,
Yeah.
I would say, is an example of structural violence in this context. Because why can't we as a society and as a state not provide the space for
who haven't got jobs.
But then, why can these kids not be here?
providing, perhaps they aren't able, we don't have the support or aren't able to put in place the support to let them behave, to learn to behave.
If they've not been taught.
So then it goes back on the parent.
maybe we need to
educate
It is
parents.
Unless
important
they're
parents
convinced
as
that
well.
maybe they've got behavioural management issues that have never been addressed.
There's so many different diverse reasons why people are marginalised within the education system. It's unbelievable.
And I think by using this system and using this to analyse is that we're not saying, even if we disagree massively on the way different settings and different professions do things, we're not saying, well, actually, the way teachers do things is wrong. We're actually saying we should be doing better, and actually we should be able to provide more services that allows teachers to do their job better with large pupils, and where pupils are disruptive, that they could be removed but don't lose out because of that, so no one loses out at the same time. It's perhaps a little bit of utopia thinking and idealistic, but you know, why not? Why not
Change
strive for
isolation
that?
to reparation. It works. There's a school there, it does actually work.
Where's that?
They don't call it isolation. It is in effect isolation, but it's reparation. And they can get their sent there at any point during the day and they take their work with them. And there is a teacher.
Yeah, but
But
that's
you
all
use work.
isolation.
Yeah, that's
But
it's not called isolation. I think it's the terminology with young people. If you call it reparation, it's about repairing that behaviour that they've shown in class, as opposed to isolating them from the class. And it's down to that terminology. When you speak to young people that are in that school, it really is the difference between them disengaging and going, yeah, I was out of order and I shouldn't spoke to me like that. You know, they won't get on and do more to shoot me out, shove me in here. And it really is that difference in its terminology. And it's amazing how much of a big difference it makes.
I'm going to agree to disagree, but that's because I am more of the teacher rather than youth worker.
Could we maybe just briefly share a couple of examples? Maybe steering away from schools. That would be just...
Oh, there you are, focus then.
No, we don't have to, but just a couple of examples across the different types of violence. Just see what people's thinking are.
One of those I have for structural violence and stuff within, well, I have two examples, is Grenfell Tower, on like how it's a crime against humanity at the highest level. And the other example I have is the NI politics and lack of power sharing, which is lack of leadership that then flows down into local communities.
Absolutely, yeah, and affects everything, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You know, lack of healthcare and things like that, and education funding shortage. And, yeah, so it just goes to show, actually, this is something that impacts such a wide range of issues that affect people's lives in many different ways. And actually, it's something that's a good example because it comes out of actual conflict, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah, we're still probably at that reconciliation stage of really trying to get the grips with it, and it's not working great.
It's on the stage of going backwards instead of forwards.
Yeah, arguably so.
Could that be extended to like the NHS crisis and the immigration problem that we have in this country? Again, the daily justice structure.
Potentially, starving the NHS of funding, structural, cultural violence, and linking this idea of immigration being the effect of that. Who kind of pushes that agenda forward? Media. Yeah, absolutely. One more example before we move on.
I've got gangs on culture.
In what way?
And membership that young people embrace, that's what word I'm looking for, enticed into joining gangs through possibly poverty, alcohol issues, just the structure of the family not being solid. And the gang then becomes the family, and that's influenced by music, social media and things like that. So the social media and the music influences the gang's behaviour, it's then obviously individualised.
Or could structural fit into that?
Yeah, I suppose it could have a music industry.
Allows that to happen.
Allows that to happen. It's not got, I mean, if you look at films have got these really clear age restrictions in the music industry. It's leading more and more into the mainstream. There's this negativity around societal values.
Yeah, it focuses on sales rather than content.
Yeah.
If you know 15's going to go and buy it, you're going to put the 15 warning on, but you're still going to try and sell it, so they're going to go and buy it.
But they can access it on YouTube, the internet, it is there, and things like that. I mean, the parental lock, you can put parental locks on, which works with films and viewing content, but I'm not sure, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not sure if that actually works with music because it doesn't have that.
I think it links to the gangs as well, though, because parents can't police 24/7. They can just go to the friend's house, connect to the Wi-Fi, and do it with friends. It doesn't matter what the parents know.
That's what I'm
So they
saying.
have access to it.
It's that good, it's that good technology and access, and it's not just, it's about the American style rap, I think, is really more detrimental than homegrown rap for comedy and the access to that, and even the stuff that's going on in South Africa, some music in South Africa is quite harsh.
So some really good examples, not just of like, you could have just rested there and said music, but actually building an understanding of where some of these different issues come from and the different messages that they provide as well, which is really, really important. I think actually when you're working with particular groups of young people, to have an understanding of where they're getting their messages from gives you a better understanding of what those messages actually are. I think that's a good preventative tip. Thank you very much for that. We'll come back to the worksheet shortly. I just want to run through, and there's a lot of language, a lot of words on the board, but just to give you an understanding of what peace education is as described by, I'm just meant to get it out so you can see what I'm rabbiting on about. But as described by this is the framework that I've been talking about, and everybody will get a copy of that via email if they want. If you put your name down, you're more than welcome to a copy. But peace education is described in a particular way by this framework. It's not a new concept. It's been around for quite some time. But perhaps rather than just reading all that out, one of the most important things for me about peace education is that it's distinguished from peace building. So in actual fact, it isn't necessarily about focusing on preventative or reactive peace building, but actually trying to ensure that people build a greater awareness regardless of the stage of conflict they might be at. Those 3 points for me sum it up quite nicely. So an educational means working on competence development of individuals. Competence is a phrase some people might not be aware of. I kind of interchange it for skills. I think that works quite well for me. It's quite a common, just a bit of background on this. This was funded by Erasmus Plus in the European Union, and competence and competency is quite a popular word in EU language, I suppose, and vocab. So for me, anytime I feel like I'm getting confused, I interchange it for skills, and it works for me. A holistic form of education that not only works by cognitive means of learning, but makes similar use of emotional and tactile approaches. So it's not just about gaining skills, but actually building yourself as a person. And multidisciplinary by nature, as it has to involve a wide range of disciplines given the holistic character of peace. That's perhaps the least important point. That's maybe if we're talking about peace education at a macro level, or maybe peace education in a country or a community like Lancaster or Lancashire in a few years' time. We're at the start of a journey here that this might develop in different organisations, and then at one point or another we might be able to reach a stage where we can come together as a multidisciplinary team. But at the moment, it's just as important that if you think this is useful for the people that you work with, that you can take this forward within single organisations, and then it can hopefully evolve organically. This is one of the biggest things that grabbed my attention whenever I was first introduced to this. And people get a little bit, sometimes people get a little bit, what's the word? I think it's a little bit hippie-ish when they see the inner peace. And then whenever the guy who was given the presentation about this particular part of the framework, well, then when he tries to describe the very middle part of this diagram as true peace, kind of made everybody switch off and think this is just ridiculous a little bit. He then used the word holistic, which was a little bit better, but I know sometimes isn't necessarily a very popular word either. So this framework and peace education more widely looks at peace as being three-dimensional. There's inner peace, there's social peace, and then there's environmental peace. Or depending on your priorities, it could be environmental peace, inner peace, social peace, etc., etc. I tend to think that the importance and the priority is placed on inner, but it's totally up to yourselves of what you focus on and what works for your setting. What do those words mean to you, to people around the table? What is inner peace likely to look like or mean to a family that you work with, or a particular young person? Confidence.
Acceptance of not being great at everything that we're doing.
Yeah. Happiness. Yeah.
That whole model school is
Does a wee bit of that. Okay.
sorry, but the inner peace is about the personal, it's about you as a person and where you are in your life and you sit within around you.
Yeah, yeah. So it's not just about developing those things that only, well, actually I was going to say something that was a contradiction there. Not just developing things that are about you, like self-esteem or confidence, but actually developing those things and knowing and gaining an awareness that they affect people around you and the world around you.
Communication, teamwork, networking, that sort of thing.
Yeah,
See,
absolutely.
I disagree because I think if you're absolutely completely happy with yourself, these two are forever going to change and you need to be secure in who you are and what you can do and what you can't do, but what you can learn to actually be effective in those two.
You do not think that completely happy with yourself without a little bit in the centre. So regardless of what happens with the environmental and the social, you are still grounded.
No, because I think that's going to be a transition bit. I don't think you'll ever be, whilst you're in the middle of them all, I think you're always going to be learning and changing as it's changing with them. It can just be.
And I think for the young people that access
No, that's fine.
acceptance,
It's
I'd
how
love
you
to
view it.
acceptance to be a good word, however, do you know what I mean? I think like it needs to be some kind of part that's like not accepting of the situation whatsoever. Do you know what I mean? And think like there's a lot of chaos and uncertainty. I think like some kind of just an equilibrium would be, you know, to be that stage of peace in that situation.
So what if inner peace was included building things like not just self-esteem and confidence about yourself, but confidence about the world around you and how you interact with that? That you can go out and try and change your situation.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. So I suppose there's like that environmental piece, isn't there? Social piece, definitely. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like, I don't know, like emancipation of it, like sort of
Yeah.
going out and
Fighting for change on behalf of
absolutely.
others.
Yeah, that's why I was a bit against that word acceptance. I think. 'Cause it's like, no, don't accept this.
Yeah, yeah.
So if you don't have inner peace, you don't have the other two.
That's
So nice, yeah. If our inner peace isn't right, I can't work on the social peace or environmental peace or anything.
Yeah.
That's what I see.
If you can't accept yourself, you haven't built that level of inner peace to work with the world around you, you're not going to be able to either affect or achieve those for yourself in terms of being happy with the world around you, happy with the society around you, and then maybe happy with the world around you as a bigger picture.
Would it be sort of having that autonomy to have that belief in you actually believe in your morals, your values, your principles, and to not necessarily allow the discourse in the environment and your society to impact on them.
Or it could be the complete opposite.
Or for you to actually have an impact on the environment and the social, but for you to be grounded within your morals and your principles.
Yeah.
To be able to disagree with what's going on.
Yeah, I think that's probably closer to it. My argument would be that it isn't just about building confidence in yourself and then saying, I'm alright, I'm not going to change ever. But actually having the confidence to say, you know what, I've heard something today that I disagree with, but I'm going to look into it more. A bit like what we do here at university. Actually looking into things a little bit in more depth and saying, after a while, maybe after a bit of an investigation, you know what, that makes sense. Or the way I've been looking at things the past however long was a little bit skewed or out and out wrong, and I'm going to change my views. That takes a lot of guts. I think that takes a lot of confidence, and that would be, for me, that would be a barometer of actually having a little bit more inner peace than if I was simply saying, I'm not changing ever. So it's about having that balance.
It's about having that autonomy over your morals and values and not letting sort of family. I mean, obviously, a lot of your morals and values and principles are instilled in you during your childhood while you grow up from society around you, family members, and the society around you.
Yeah.
And it's about having that autonomy to say, you know what, this is what my mum believes, or I don't.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a 2 or maybe even 3-way process. You know, it's about building this yourself, creating the opportunities to build up confidence and resilience, but also taking opportunities. You know, my development as a young person was massively impacted by the opportunities of doing cross-community youth work, both as a young person and then as a volunteer. So, and then as a professional to a lesser extent back home. So, it's about acknowledging, I think, the world around you, and actually understanding that you take different opportunities that will teach you different things. And it's a bit like a menu. You take certain things, you leave certain things. The things you leave, you might come back to. The things you take, you might decide, oh, I shouldn't have taken that in the first place. But it's a constant reflective process. Again, just some kind of key pointers about the peace education framework. Really, really important point about aims to support educators in a formal and informal setting. And that's what makes me really, really confident. Although the work I'm planning on or developing on doing in a secondary school isn't classroom based as an educator, but actually that this work and this framework can work well in a school and have a positive impact, just as much as it could work in this family intervention service, for example, or youth centre, or wherever you might be thinking of right now. One of the other areas, and I suppose the next couple of slides just as a bit of a pre-warning, this kind of information, but just to give you a bit more context about this, is that there's a couple of different competence areas. There's contextual competence areas, and then there's action competence areas. Again, it's a lot of detail that I don't want to bore you with, and it would take us far too long to go into detail, but you can probably explore a little bit more when you get the copy through yourself. The contextual competence areas are participation, interdependence, and diversity. So these are probably terms that are quite familiar to a lot of people around the table. And I'm a wee bit gutted. You might be thinking actually, oh Nathan, you've left some gaps in your table there. But I'm a little bit gutted because I haven't done that on purpose. That's what the framework has left those gaps, and I don't know if it's a little bit of OCD in me, but I kind of wish that there was a little bit of uniform across all 3 stages, but for whatever reason I've decided not to. Hopefully you can get a bit of an idea whenever you put those terms together. like political participation or social participation, you can start to build an understanding in your own mind of actually what that looks like. Participating in your own community, for example. That could be, for a young person, that could be as simple as going out and joining a sports team, or even having a kick about with friends. For others, it could be becoming a member of the youth parliament, something that puts them up in front of their peers to get elected, for example. So there's such a wide spectrum of actions that this can inform. And again, I think it's another reason why I'm confident that it can be used for different young people in different ways. And keep saying young people, but different people in general. This is perhaps a little bit more important for where we're going to go with these worksheets. And it's the action competence areas. I'll give you a wee moment to read them, but just to kind of focus your attention on living peace, the living peace competence area. That's the area that we're going to look at this evening. The description again, kind of, you could suggest it's a little bit free-loving. You know, talking about harmoniously with oneself and things like that. But I think the competences are more important. Being non-violent, transforming conflict in everyday life, and exploring identity and embracing diversity. I don't know about you, but whenever I first read these, I could see these in the work that I've done previously, particularly that last one. That idea of exploring identity and embracing diversity. As a youth worker and as a lecturer, I've done plenty of that, and I've encouraged plenty of that. So that was quite a natural step for me to have that as part of this process. You could argue in different settings and different contexts that we would be able to use building peace, and perhaps maybe after a little bit of time of developing my own understanding on this, I could come back and say actually building peace is just as important. But right now I think where we are at and the communities that we work in more often than not, I think getting people to focus on themselves to then benefit the wider community is more important. And really just briefly to underline that this isn't about trying to tackle violence. Violence in the sense of physical violence or war or rioting or whatever. But actually peace education is about encouraging peaceful change. Our communities and our societies change constantly. Sometimes there can be a lot of resistance to change, and sometimes actually there needs to be resistance to change because we might have that structural violence coming on us, that we're having change forced upon us that we don't agree with or that we know is going to be detrimental to our community. But actually if we can get it to a place where we resist that in a peaceful way, or that we can actually have our say in civil society, going back to that participation, it's just as important, if not more important. And that's why the focus is on peaceful change. And that second quote for me is almost a little bit of an acceptance that as much as we would like to live in a place where we don't argue with people and we don't get any sort of violence, whether it's physical or otherwise, we're human beings, we're social beings, interaction is a conflict in itself in some ways. So there has to be a little bit of an acceptance that it happens, but not that it's okay, and certainly not that it can escalate. For those of you who perhaps more important to current students who feel like they always need to take away a little bit of theory or something with a reference on it that might be useful, I've had a look at a couple of really important and useful studies that have been done on peace education over the past 15-20 years. And I really like this example. A group of Israeli Jewish young people who studied the Northern Irish conflict. They didn't visit Northern Ireland, they studied it intensely. And it made no reference, there was no comparison whatsoever made to their own conflict in Israel-Palestine. And then at the end of the programme, the participants were asked to write an account of their conflict that they live in, the Israeli-Palestine conflict. When those participants wrote that letter, they were far more empathetic about Palestinians, about people on the other side of their conflict. And when a control group in the study, so a group that didn't take part in this peace education programme, the study programme of the Northern Irish conflict, when they were asked to write a letter, it didn't have that empathy. It was wrote in a really one-dimensional way, based on their experience of how they were right, their values were right, and that the Palestinians, those on the other side of the conflict, were wrong and were the enemy. And used some quite difficult and nasty language, certainly in comparison to the group that took part in the programme. So I really like that, because actually for me that opened my eyes. So I think, well, whenever I have to talk about, use a comparative study, I have to talk about the two different places or the two different contexts. But actually this proves you don't have to bring in your own experience, your own lived experience, to enact really positive change. I suppose these other studies, again, academic tidbits for those of you who maybe want to take it away, show that peace education works over what is quite a prolonged project. A year long is quite significant. There was deterioration in things like stereotyping and the negative perceptions of people on the other side started to break away quite significantly. So this is shown to work. And again, another example from Northern Ireland, where cross-community work is done in schools, that people didn't necessarily pay enough attention to the environment. So getting people away from their normal environment, perhaps at an interface, the so-called peace wall, is just as important as the content that you put into your programme. And whilst the example here is teachers, I absolutely have to hold my hands up and say, I've done this as well. As a youth worker, as a lecturer, getting scared about those controversial topics and saying, oh, I'm not covering that today, not a chance. But it's detrimental to learning. It can be really difficult, but actually grabbing hold of those controversial issues are the very reason why you're probably running such a programme. So it might feel really scary, and it is really scary, but it's important to grab those and go on the journey with the people you're working with. This slide perhaps gives you a little bit of a context to some of the examples I've put on the worksheet, and this relates to the stuff I know I've mentioned it a couple of times about the work 1 day a week that I'm starting to develop to do. It was actually my first day in the school today, with young people with social and emotional needs in their secondary school. And these are some of the kind of priorities that, through conversations with the team that I'm working within, that I've developed when I'm writing these programmes for young people. That pupils can explore their own identities on their own. So just get to grips with what they think, what they believe in, what they like, what they dislike, what gets them angry, what makes them happy. And then start to explore those in connection with other people. So the work that we're going to do as a conflict management intervention programme is going to be groups of 6 pupils. Just 6, over 6 weeks, an hour session. So getting the pupils to share their own identities, explore it first, and then share them openly. Getting pupils to build confidence and their resilience in their own identity, saying it's okay to be me, but then actually making sure that they can accept the differences of other people as well. So that goes back to one of the key competencies, exploring identity, embracing diversity. And these two last points go back to that point we just made about accepting that conflict is going to happen to a certain extent. Pupils can explore their behaviours, how it impacts on themselves. So kicking off in class might get you chucked out of class, but it might also mean that you don't get your GCSEs, just as a really blunt example off the top of my head. It has negative impacts. It might not be in the here and now, but it's coming. Eventually it'll hit you. And also pupils can explore how their behaviour impacts on others. It could be that, a phrase I heard a few times today was that pupils, certain people know how to push the buttons of other pupils, almost like they're people winding other people up. And the negative consequences that could have for the person you're trying to wind up. It might seem great crack to the person doing the winding, and they might get a response. But what does that pupil that's being wound up all day long take home from that? What does that make them feel about themselves? So those priorities made me think about what direction am I going? How am I going to tackle what do the pupils that I want to work with need the most from me and what I'm developing? And I think the priority here is inner peace. It is about exploring identities and making sure young people are confident with their own identities, and making sure they don't have negative consequences on other people. Embracing those differences that are in the school environment. Happier pupils might mean pupils that don't bully as much, might mean pupils don't kick off as much, don't need to be taken out of class, which means schools as a whole, behaviour might be improved, and schools statistics, all important statistics, can increase. In fact, for me, that's environmental peace. That's the idea of a happier school environment. Notice I've done it, it might be really, really subtle, but for me, the priorities there are about peace, working with individuals to affect positive relationships, so inner and social. The slightly, subtly faded arrow to environmental peace is a little bit of an acknowledgement on my part that I don't think that's my priority, but I do hope that I can observe positive changes in the environment and that it will have positive knock-on effect. I'd like you to do exactly the same. I managed to keep it to 2 arrows going in the same direction as each other. That doesn't necessarily have to be the way you do it. But try. Because I can't imagine, maybe more creative people might be able to draw all sorts of arrows and make sense of it. I feel anything more than that would confuse me. Yes, yeah, that's the bottom left corner. Sorry. Of course, yeah. Just anybody else want another copy? There's plenty there, so there's a few more there at least.
It starts at the same place, but it goes in the opposite way.
And that's interesting. Excuse me, now it can be the same priority, but go completely different focus.
So where am I person?
And how does it, well, actually, maybe we're jumping ahead of ourselves. Keep up.
I think it does. That's what I'm just trying to work through.
think
What
where I work,
It's in a which then it's down to the individual child. They struggle with their environmental factor when the child in house, and they struggle with this particular child with managing their ability to deal with that.
Environmental and social.
Can we go back to that one where you've got
Yeah.
the, have you got a thing where it's in an environmental and social that gives you, I know you've sort of done it here, but
Love there.
when we originally wrote that, the environmental piece is about it's been a picture, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't have a slide on that. I'm just kind of like,
So there's about environmental,
yeah,
it's about government policies, society, the whole Jackie social needs is more about their community and their immediate.
it can be. I think the way you're describing it is absolutely right. My example was inner peace is making sure young people in a school are comfortable with themselves. Social peace could be literally removing bullying perhaps from just two individuals, including that one, or a class or a year group. And then environmental peace is a happy, effective school.
For me, the inner piece is about developing those
He's constantly
skills
skills. And then time
for needing
Yeah.
to give them that confidence, the skills to be able to go out and be an active part in the job market, in the labour market.
Yeah.
And obviously, if they're coming off of benefits and into the labour market, then that much more to show the central part, which for me affects the whole environment. It affects the whole environment. People are actually actively engaged in working and in the labour market. It benefits the country as a whole.
Yes. And again, forgive me for the assumptions, but a young person or any person for that matter who isn't engaged and isn't in work, for example, and is experiencing economic hardship, what about the effects of crime? That's not going to contribute to environmental peace.
knowing the child well is first one sign
It goes the other way around, and as an effect of them having that job and having that disposable income, then they can go out into society and find their place in society, find their group of friends, more productive peers, a lot more productive peer group, a peer group that actually goes out and maybe goes to the cinema, goes for meals or whatever, joins an organisation that they wouldn't have been able to
as you're playing with. Oh, this is a distraction. It's all about distraction.
Yeah.
So for me, it's the opposite way around.
And that makes sense. Now that you've I was a bit like initially, but now that you've described it, it makes sense. Yeah, it definitely does. And I think that's why it's really good to build our context into this. Well, we need to build our context into this.
And skills as well to understand.
Yeah.
Imagine the significance
Because I
of
mean, at the end of the day,
it.
these young people that are working
How environment and
learning
places.
disabilities,
Not ideal.
and things
With the
like
best way
that.
in the world.
Yeah,
It's
That is something that
oh, it's significantly better when it's different, but it's still not absolutely ideal. Not ideal.
Yeah.
Without
Yeah.
just find a job that fits their competence.
That's perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like
Just and really, really bespoke. How it's just an example of how this can be tailored to an individual.
It's a bit upsetting.
It's really exciting.
I wasn't expecting
I was a bit, what's it now?
I think the label does put people off. It does sound very worldly, but
I think it's, for me, it's more about, that's my perception of it when I read about it. It was more about police deprivation in the city.
As in, there's that sense of
Resolution between skills generation and community, which I suppose could be hot to understand.
yeah.
For me,
Just I never
What's the
knew there was a
attitude?
framework.
when I read about it,
destination. I
Facebook.
mean, as in the
Yeah.
any learning is learning.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Well worth doing.
But it's flipped out to me because this is so important. And,
For those social workers.
This is just another strand that maybe people haven't been thinking of social justice. I think is, you know, it really is a good tool to support.
So just for residential carers advertising now, right about that. And I was like, no one knows it. How do I do that?
Yeah.
Just in the commute.
Yeah,
Is that what
yeah.
it's making me? So much better.
Would you actually say
For those of you saying, I've just heard a little bit of I don't know which way to go. Maybe it's not about choosing what way to go or where you start. Think about it as a starting point. I started with inner. I don't think that was my choice. I think that is what the needs of my understanding of the young people. I don't know them very well, but my understanding of the young people I'm about to start work with, that's what they demand of me in my work. So it wasn't necessarily what I'm choosing to focus on, but so if that might not make your decision any easier.
Just for expanding the works, if they determine how the whole system needs changing, so that we can fit in it better, then your starting point would be a different area.
I'd still say that was in the thesis, issue with maybe roles and authority and what's come from home. And if they've got an issue with school and the teacher saying, no, you can't do that, maybe they're being told that at home as well.
Maybe it's not an issue with the hierarchy of the school system. Maybe it's an issue with their understanding of learning and they're struggling to really learn within that format. And they're saying, if it was explained to me differently, if it was in a different format, I'd be fine, but it's the format that's struggling, which then leads you to look at the system of school.
I suppose it depends what the grievance is, and this kind of goes back to that age-old discussion that I think we use it in our youth and community work interviews, and then we're still talking about it on graduation day. It's like the social control or social education.
Yeah.
You know, I would love to think there's lots of things about this world that I dislike, but I know some of them I have very limited opportunity to change, or realistically I'm going to be able to change. So it's about, perhaps a little bit of it is about fitting into that social control category, as much as I don't like that, about actually saying to young people, you have to be realistic with your demands, and there's lots of things that you can change and be really good at changing, or having a voice to change, that we can focus our energy on, rather than just saying, if someone came to me and said, I hate school, I don't want to be here, my response to them would be, well, unfortunately you have to be. How can we make it work that you enjoy it more and understand what you're getting out of it?
Break it down as to my needs. What is it about the school that you actually hate?
It might not even be just about the school, so like someone just mentioned there, could be coming from peers, or could be coming from parents. Yeah.
Could be a learned behaviour. The parents hated school, so they put it in the high school, maybe. It's that generation, and it's one of those it's that cycle.
It's like intergenerational, isn't it?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And can I just point out, it isn't all about teacher bashing, is it? I thought that was very objective.
But then you sit there and kids say they hate school, but then if you sit there and say they hate the job, like then they just you can't. They have to do school. If I can write someone work, I just have to get on with it. So they have to just get on with it. So this whole like let's put around them. You can't put foot around when you're in a job. So we might as well just do it now.
Yeah, but are they emotionally mature enough to actually be treated like that? I mean, potentially in the higher years in high school, maybe theoretically it depends on their emotional growth. Certainly in primary school and the introductory years of high school, I think you can arguably say that absolutely they're definitely not emotionally mature enough to deal with that. And although they don't need pussyfooting, need grabbing to a, not literally obviously, that's wrong, but introducing to the fact that actually there's absolutely nothing you can do about this spread, and you are going to do this, otherwise your mum and dad are going to have to homeschool you.
Mm-hmm.
Won't they really like that at parents' evening? And so yeah, we can't treat children like the many adults. They're not. They're children. In my
It's
opinion.
like, yeah, I'm the because I'm like I've lectured, I've been teaching, and now I'm purely pastoral. So it is hard, isn't it? Because I'm literally banging the adults. Because we drive home, and you're the teacher, and I'm the one that.
Yeah. No, I get that I'm going to
It
have
is
completely
hard.
different views to everyone, and plus I'm secondary, so it is different. But I think when they come into year 7, they just need to put the big girl pants on and get on with it. It's you know.
They haven't all got big girl pants at home though, because their home may not have the equipment to deal with it.
And you've got to take into account they're going through biological changes right at that stage, so
They're going through a
their
massive
hormones are
transition as well.
everywhere. You've
And I
gone
mean-
from
I mean-
having a child who's now changing and getting hormones and emotions.
And then you've got the
How
transitional
are they-
stages
I've got
of
to
those
say, year
with
7
learning
people at home.
difficulties and behavioural
Yeah,
issues.
right now.
And
I've got
mental health
137 of them
conditions.
that are.
Maybe you leave them behind. I go home.
Yeah, no,
I'd have to
I'm
smell them in the morning.
It's a huge transition as well from being
Oh,
the
it's
big
massive.
fish in the little pond to being the little fish in the big pond
It's not.
in itself. And then if you add other things like stuff that's going on at home, all sorts of different things, mental health conditions, loads of different things, and they put into that
I think
melting
it's
pot.
quite.
So to say to a cohort of year 7, just put on your big boy and big girl pants and get on with it.
Yeah,
It's really, it can be really quite damaging to some
But
of
then-
those young people.
Sam was about to comment.
Sorry.
Sorry, we're aware.
I think it's right to point out that your opinion is not wrong. It's your opinion. As professionals like around the table, your opinion is not wrong. It's your opinion because that is your field of work. And I respect that and I get that, and that is what you have to do because you have 35 students or whatever in one class. And I think where our view, other people around the table's views coming from, is we work on social well-being of young people. We work on them, their personal development, and that's where I think the lack of the crossover is missing within school, where we don't work well enough together as practitioners, and I think that's where it's lacking. Not that the fall down is on teachers, the fall down is actually on the system, the higher powers that be that actually don't bring in the workers that's needed to work within pupils within the school. So I think that's a better way.
And then we did have an ELIS 10 years ago, when I was at school, 15 years ago, and
Yeah, we don't class to put it in a,
No,
in
we
a,
didn't.
in a word.
we didn't.
I'm going to say when I was at school we did. I mean,
So, we had the 5 sets, and it was all based on ability. And, sorry to bring you up in this, but you had a shit upbringing, but you didn't use it. Do you know what I mean? And this is the thing, as a teacher, and I get it, youth work and all this stuff, but as a teacher, I'm not, going to sit there and say, oh, sorry you're having a bit of a bad day, because everyone has bad days, and I get that they're 12 years old, but they have to get over it. And I know that you still agree with me.
say 10 years
I
ago,
think
let's
this
just
is
say 10
a lot of
years
the people
ago.
around the table are going to be mums here sitting here thinking, oh my god.
Bloody
If you
good
don't-
teacher, thank you very
You
much.
might be a great teacher, you might be able to teach the academic side brilliantly and structure wonderful classroom sessions, but if you are not being able to notice that chold one day, there could be a safeguarding issue at home because you want to put on big girl pants, you failed in my eyes because it's like, well, where was the...
Well, I know when someone needs help, but at the end of the day, you've got to choose whether I'm going to sit there and teach you maths or whether I'm going to listen to you cry because you've fallen out with your friend.
Okay, it will depend on the complexities of whatever's going on.
Like if
right,
someone comes
but-
to me and says, I've got a serious issue, I'm not
No,
going
but
to be like,
they're not necessarily going to say that to you though.
because no one says that to me, it's fine.
I did not say that's very defensive, but that's just, they're not necessarily going to talk to you and say, I've got something going on at home. If you've got a child that suddenly is acting out, it's sort of like, well, why have they suddenly started it's sort of not just assuming that they're just choosing to be hard work in the classroom.
We all grew up, and 15, 20 years ago when we went to school, you did not sit there and you did not have these places to go to, and everybody.
But what
15, 20 years ago, we didn't have social media, we didn't have Facebook, we didn't have this digital technology, we didn't have this access to globalisation, we didn't have all those complexities.
I know when I was
Which
at school,
have
you got
a massive impact.
club around there.
Which have a massive, they are having a massive impact on the social, mental, psychological well-being of our young people in society, and that's across the world.
But there's something here where it's teachers who are getting blamed for all
No, we're not blaming teachers. I'm not blaming teachers. What I'm saying is you've got to look at the societal influences as well as, it's all right saying, well, we went to school, but society has come on, and especially technologically wise, has come on leaps and leaps and leaps and bounds. Absolutely, it's just flown like that. So somebody who went to school 10 years ago can't associate their education with somebody who's in school now, 10 years later, because it's a completely different lifestyle, completely different society that we live in.
Yeah, from my point of view, just purely as pastoral, I must admit, I'm not a parent, but I do get a lot of phone calls off parents asking me for advice, that they're saying to me, what can I do? And I find that a bit daunting, as a 6-year-old without a kid, parents asking me for help with their kid, and I do guide them in the way that, to all the agencies, and I can't believe the lack of, not getting help off the agencies, I work with social services all the time. They're just shocking. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
massive
I'm so sorry. Yeah, I know. But and the parents crying out for help and things like that, and the students crying out for help. And I think it's just the resources in general. I think everyone's just stressed. So I don't think I think it's just everyone that's, and obviously you're at the front line, and you're saying you're there to do a job, but it's everyone.
They've cut all.
But then I do understand what people are saying. At the end of the day, it's hard for parents as well when they're saying, "Well, what are you doing?" And it's just
Because the education system has got the whole kit and caboodle now.
But that's what I mean. But for me, but that's it. So from the
hospital,
the hospitals are ringing me, doctors, social services, the police. When stuff's going out outside of school, it's well, what are you doing? And I'm I've got 137 year 7s, and one. You've seen what I've done today. How busy I've been, and I'm saying, what am I doing?
Thing is though, everyone's got a different agenda.
Yeah.
Aren't they?
Nobody
When
takes
they
responsibility.
communicate with each other, they don't necessarily communicate particularly well because they're going specifically with that agenda. And they don't give a rat's ass what exam marks they're going to get because that's not their concern. Their concern is keeping that child out of youth offending or whatever, do you know what I mean? Which obviously will have an impact on their exam results. So, but
I'm just shocked that nobody takes responsibility. That's my biggest thing, that nobody
sort of accepts when they've messed up and go right.
Yeah,
right,
or
this is my
nobody.
apartment, this is
Yeah,
yours.
or but even from the that's the biggest thing I've noticed. Even the parents want to score.
Yeah.
The support.
Yeah, a lot of parents as well. That ones that I work with anyway, that a lot of them and talk to them don't like accessing help because they feel like they're being judged for it. But it's breaking down that if you do though, you'll get the help, and then maybe teachers won't necessarily end up really frustrated, as I think your job's probably driven you to the point of strangling children right now. You maybe went into that, what to do and still do, but I think it's probably just the pressures of everything else that have got you to a point where the child's coming in and instead of being able to once upon a time be maybe, but it's maybe just the amount of pressure you have got on you.
And wouldn't it be nice, and it kind of goes back to this discussion we had earlier about actually, and it might feel a wee bit idealistic, but what if we had the resources to do everything as well as we need to do it? As a community, as a group of different practitioners around the table, that we all have we all want the same aim, I think, and that's the benefit the people we work for, and often the vast majority of people around the table will work with the same sort of people, and that's children and young people. So wouldn't it be nice if we had the resources and the structures in place to fulfill all our agendas fully, and in a way that actually doesn't create conflict? The discussion we've had there is a really positive and frank one, And it's a discussion for another day, perhaps, that actually we could apply this to our own professional working, never mind and the multi-agency teams that we work in and the partnerships that we have to work not just in a peaceful way, but a more coherent way that benefits young people.
Do you also find that families are dismantled more now? I mean, when I was growing up, I had this uncles lived on the same area, not necessarily in the same street, but my brother lived next door. So that support network from the family was there. And I think a lot of mothers nowadays, especially the young ones, don't necessarily have that support because grandmas are working longer hours and grandma used to be that support to people that someone would work. And the whole structure of the society that we live in is
My
massively,
challenge with
massively
kids,
changed.
like the boys, look back like the fathers. You know, that's been a big issue. And ours is the opposite. Ours is a bit like we had like stepbrothers and stepsisters, and like they're like friends. Do you know, the same year, and because it's a bit interbred where we are. You know, that's our other issue. It's really that's been our big issue this year. Yeah, it is. It's a bit, isn't it? It's a bit.
It's a very close-knit community.
No, it is very, yeah.
Everyone's really listening.
Yeah. I don't live there. Yeah, I don't live there. Yeah, no, but that's what it is. It is, and everyone knows everyone. Community.
We've got to move on a little bit, but I wanted to give you a snapshot, and maybe actually something that we might have to overlook a little bit is that bottom right box on the worksheet of the type of piece and actually positive observations of how you might be able to acknowledge you're moving through your priorities. So for me, you know, my priority or the list of priority would be inner, social, environmental. Positive observations might be that young people, there's a reduction in bullying, for example, that there are more social groups. An observation around social piece might be that there's perhaps more student-led groups in schools, and environmental might be less students excluded, maybe even better, like that knock-on effect of better exam results as a consequence of that. Could be a long way down the line. This is talking massive knock-on effects, but you know, the idealist in me is hopeful that it would reach that. I know there's a lot of writing on that, and I don't expect you to kind of take it all in. I just wanted to give you a kind of a snapshot into what I've been planning lately with the work I've been talking to you about a little bit. This is just one activity from one session of 6, and it's called the Identity Onion. And the purpose of this, and I've been able to link it to a whole raft of learning objectives from this very document, the purpose of this, in a kind of nutshell, is to get young people to put on paper, quite literally, what their identity is to them, and then share it. Share it and then listen to other people and accept it. What some of those cues that you write on the different layers of your onion, things like what do I like to wear, or what music do I like to listen to, habits that I have, or right the way down to what do I believe in, what do I want to achieve with my life, what would I never do. Those are really important on paper, but actually it's what's going to be more important in that activity is actually the conversational cues that the staff members use to get people to elaborate on those. And if there's any comments by other pupils, positive or negative, you know, reaffirming or not, actually that they're done in a way that is sensitive to people's identities and what they put on paper, and it's kind of encourages gentle exploration rather than any sort of dismissiveness. Again, really rafts of language, but I just kind of wanted to show how I've taken the learning objective. That first column is from word for word from that document. The second column is word for word from that document. But the third is how I've developed it to my practice. What I expect to see and what I expect the learning outcomes to be for the young people that I'm working with. So, to use an example, pick a good one I'm quite familiar with. Number 6, to enable the learner to appreciate and celebrate a diverse world of unique identities. The generic spiel in this would be things like, I am able to recognise that I participate in a diverse world of unique identities. It doesn't really say any more than the actual learning objective. For me, I would hope that a young person could say to me in their own language, I know my own identity and I know it's different to others. Things I like come from other places and other people, and that's okay. And that, you know what, that could be as blunt as saying, I really like Chinese food, and I know Chinese food comes from China, and those people are different to me. It's totally okay if it's that blunt. It's acknowledging difference, and it actually acknowledges that that young person is taking on board that difference, accepting it, acknowledging it. That was just what I ran through, but I want to about the different kind of types of piece and how you would observe. So if you have like any pressing thoughts, feel free to put them down. But I want to kind of scoot on a wee bit as we are starting to run out of time a wee bit. We've got a group in after us, so we've kind of got to get out quite handy. So to do this effectively, and some of you have that much to review, you have taken a second worksheet, which is awesome, but to do this final piece, you have to review what's on your front page, your front side, and then on the back is a large box. And to do this, you've got to review what you've already written, think about your priorities, but also review a bit of a menu that I've got for you. And this is, these are the competences from the living piece, or the learning objectives from the living piece competence area. So, yeah. Sorry. Everybody, oh, sorry. So there are, just to give you a run through what you're looking at. It's a wee bit small, sorry. It's all in the email, so hopefully you get enough to just make a start now. So there's 4 competence areas in the living piece kind of section. Number 1 is being non-violent. Number 2 is transforming conflict in everyday life. Number 3 is engaging with the world. And then number 4 is exploring identity and embracing diversity, which for me is like the important one, but you might be reading those titles and thinking, well, non-violence is really important to me in my work. So that might be what you want to focus on. So those are 4 competences, and within those there's a number of different objectives, which I'll give you a few minutes to read.
What did the peace framework come off the back of? Like, what was there anything that actually triggered the become a thing?
Peace education's been around for a long time. The framework, I think, has come out of 2 things. People just with a general interest in the area, but also the Erasmus Plus kind of project. So there was a number of exchanges carried out between youth workers, youth work academics across Europe, things like that. A wee bit gutted because I literally got involved in it as it, well, I didn't get involved in it, to be honest. I went to the launch, you know, so it was a real shame not to get involved in the process, but it was on the back of quite an extensive period of development and writing and sharing practice.
And is it's recognised for work in Britain, the government, is it?
No, it isn't. It's purely just, it's used across Europe more than it is in Britain. They purposely chose Britain to launch it in because it didn't gain a lot of traction.
Okay.
So I suppose this is me doing my bit to kind of clean up a little bit, but it's not recognised in any formal sense.
So that the employability competencies framework they have in Europe, that was just so that they might be readable in the sense of, well, of course here it's just, you know, different each employer has different criteria for skills and things like that, whereas if that framework we brought to practice, it would be universal as the whole job market.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily very likely that something that's accepted in Europe is about to become accepted
No,
in
I
this
know.
country.
I think that is highly unlikely. It's like shooting at the stars and hitting more.
So, rather than just looking at the areas in general, like hopefully you have had a bit of a look at the specific learning objectives in each one. I know there's a lot to take in a short space of time. What I'd like you to do, if you can, and again this is done, I think this is best done by doing two things. Having a flip back over and thinking, what have I already covered, and you know, what have I acknowledged, and what are my priorities? And then maybe even I've done it in the wrong order. You know, we tend to have a tendency to go left to right. So almost encourages you to pick a competency number and then think about the practice and the expected learning outcome. You might actually want to go the other direction. What is it in your work that you're looking to achieve? What do the people, the stakeholders, the young people, the children, whoever, what do they need from you? What are the learning outcomes they want or they need? And your action doesn't necessarily have to be a funky artistic activity like the Identity Onion. It could be something really practical. It could be establishing a whole project. I'd like you to maybe drill down a little deeper than that and be a bit more specific. It could be creating the time to meet in a structured way with an individual.
So this is not about where we're at in practice now, this is about
No, this is about what you do in your practice. Yeah. And I'm not expecting you to come out with brand new ideas on the spot. Think about stuff that you're already doing. Maybe you have a favourite activity. When you work with a group of young people, there's an icebreaker that you know is really, really effective. Maybe stick that down here and think of how you can apply the learning objectives to that.
Yeah. That's the diversity.
You can even be a better person than me and apply multiple competency and learning objectives to single actions. Go on, give it a go.
There's confidence around accepting the people and just
I think that's number 4. Exploring identity and embracing diversity. Number 2 is the nice one for that. Enable the learner to strengthen their sense of self in relationship to other unique identities. And that's wrapped. I know, I appreciate that could be wrapped up in more simpler language, but that's just saying comfortable in myself around others. It could be as simple as broken down to that.
it's about building that. This session is about building that. It's good to get the skills actually, but the underlying about working in teams create out of it completely unique to them as an individual team.
Yeah.
So where would that be? Like that.
It's number 4.
It's teamwork, it's accepting others, it's exploring themselves. It's quite a multitude in that one section, isn't it?
Again, the language doesn't necessarily attract you to this one, but number 5, to enable the learner to find and take their place within the Earth community, interchange that for team or community, quite simply. If you're talking about working with others, that's taking your place within a group.
See, I like this one as well on exploring identity and embracing. I like number 6 to enable the learner to appreciate and celebrate a diverse world with unique identity. I think that is like core of this session.
Yeah.
Because it's about each individual's uniqueness coming together and creating something.
Yeah. I like number 6 as well. I think I've actually put it in a few places already. A lot of them work.
So what that bit LPC for 6.
You put me in love with that word. Don't have any time. I suppose it's a bit thinking about you're just talking about developing that path. In that path.
Yeah.
No, it isn't necessarily that path could meet certain competencies or learning objectives, but different aspects of that. So, is there practical elements to that path? No.
I don't know because we don't just went on a meeting with the leaders, but I'm looking at parts that can go to the
Yeah, definitely. If it's like even just some examples, so I was in a project with a project before together from different communities, and the idea was to bring the people into the different areas and show them walk around where they come from. So a lot of those people we have most of us in Catholics because the full base for that.
What you do is took a while, and it took me a while to be that one.
I don't know about this area, where the certain roses and
Yeah. I think it would really be this area, but my initial thoughts would be that even the work with and then part of your work with them is dealing with the stereotyping of the majority of their futures, funders, purchasers, you've been told to working through it. Why are you working with them? So you've been so we can see the importance of that.
Do you know what I mean? It's someone who's
They still have this secret towards other things.
I was on last week and someone needs to think about it. It's just like what is going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's easier than playing catch all
It does, yeah. Oh, yeah. So a lot
It'd be nice to
Yeah,
come in.
as well, I assume.
backwards and forwards. For sure.
Coming back to being
A year and a half or something. So I think it's quite right.
Yeah,
It is like
in their own,
like
in their unique way.
parents sort of step in and she's refusing to step in. The table is directly.
Yeah, but it's matching us to knowing us to move forward. That's basically
I think it's something that
nasty questions for any as well. Then
maybe in a decade time, again,
or not to
the
react.
issue will yeah.
Yeah, no, that's how it's
Because you can see it as my father and
childhood.
the troubles. And now I'm at the age where I understand it all. And like, I was brought up in a constant you know, that was why definitely from that I've now had these my family still has quite strong progressive views and stuff, so people growing up are brought up in that way within each area. So if you say it's forced upon you in a way because of the area you grew up in, you have to believe in what is in that area. So yeah, I guess more of just the last part of the generations.
I wouldn't even be aware of it. It's a difficult one.
Yeah.
Mine's ideas around the family, that'd be brilliant if you chose to involve me even in a lot of people. So yeah, absolutely anything you need. And like you say, I think it might have basically it's another European job, but it is competencies. So I don't know if that would be.
And then they want their all day. Yeah, they finish it at midday again.
It's still quite bad on the ground.
No, it's fine. It is interesting. I don't know. You can do
Yeah. Right. There's quite a lot of
But if it's just a print copy, right, folks. I'm sorry I'm going to have to curtail some of your discussions. Could we have some really, really brief examples? Because I'm conscious that we'll probably have the next group kind of knocking on the door soon enough. So just a couple of examples of the competency maybe one competency learning objective you've picked and how that might be applied to your work.
We said to enable the learner to actively seek and take on feedback from others to transform the violent attitudes and behaviour. And what I would inform time was get them to draw around the hands and each wrote something about each individual person and then put it on the wall. Well, I'm in the process of putting it on the wall.
Brilliant.
So that we can, but it's to like help young people with their self-esteem and increase learning.
Excellent. Like it, yeah. So, what would just give us a quick idea? What would be in the hand?
Like just like some of them put like friendly or nice person, or if they didn't really know each other, they might say, "Oh, they're good at maths."
Okay.
Or things like that. You know, if they're in the same set, something like it would be as basic as that, just because they might not necessarily know each other as well.
Brilliant.
It was nice for the kids to read and.
Yeah, definitely. Nice one. Thank you very much. Any other examples?
So to enable the learner to take part in connected conversation with others, and where I work, they all come from broken homes and really struggle to build relationships. So for us, we have independent therapy that's a one-to-one basis and it's built around them and things. But for us, it's the simple thing of if a child's struggling with a certain self, it's a one-to-one activity outside playing football or staying in a park or something like that. Or even playing the hard questions game. Just you talk about things like you talk about things like me, building a relationship with them. Being able to build it it's so much easier when they're really struggling with them to use something, I just go in and then.
Next one. Thanks very much, Val. Anybody else? Can you take one more example?
I'm trying to get him, because I really like his first one, but I don't think before that. I do a session with people that are in all different contexts and different countries. And we go to Cumbria, try to be the teams, and just tell them they have to create a country. And it can be as mad and random and as whatever as they want it to be, but there's certain things they have to have. Flags, they have to design a flag, they have to decide what currency is, the laws, who runs the country, national dress, national food, various different things. You know, if you get caught stealing something, what's the punishment? So all those different, there's about 30 different criteria that you can use in different contexts for them to build this country, and then deliver back to the rest of the groups. And for me, it gets them to recognise their own uniqueness, because there's no right or wrong in these countries. It can be as diverse as they want to be. So whatever they want to put on there, and they work as a team to discuss that. So it's them getting to know each other and the differences and rules and things like that in that fun way. It teaches them about teamwork, and working with others and bonding with others and accepting other people within that team thing. And it recognises their own individual skills, so you might have a natural leader in there, or you might have someone who's quite artistic, who does like the drawing or something. So all these different things come out of that one session. So as a practitioner, it really opens up the doors for that conversation later when we're working with them.
Were you able to, I might have missed it in there, but attribute a learning objective?
I did the C4 on there, and I think it pretty much covers all 1 to 6.
Pretty elaborate activities have the potential to do that, and cross competences as well. So yeah, nice one, really nice example. Thank you. Thank you very much for doing that. Unless you have any questions, that's us for this evening. I hope you found it really useful. I know it's quite introductory. It is a very, very complex document and complex kind of concept, but hopefully it's enough to kind of go away. If you feel excited by it and you feel it's useful, whether to your studies or to your practice, that you can take it away with you. What you'll get from me, make sure you've signed a sheet and make sure your email's on it. What you'll get from me is a copy of the presentation. So there's a bit of a reading list afterwards and some links to resources, as well as a copy of this. Okay? And if we get the video kind of ripped off in time, then I'll send you a link to that as well if you want to share it with colleagues and so on. This might sound really, really geeky, but if you do use this, I am really excited to hear about how you use it. So if you ever want to drop me a line, my email's there, and obviously you'll get it whenever I email you the stuff out. Even just share what you've used, how you found it, was it good, was it disaster, whatever. I'd be happy to hear anything. But if you feel like it could be any support in any way, then again, don't be afraid to get in touch and give me a shout and ask some questions. Any questions then to finish off? I just want
Is it acceptable to reference it in your academic work?
It's a question for another day, I think. Right. Thank you very much, folks. I really appreciate that. Please come on.
Thank you.